colony was already dying when the warships arrived, and the only question left was whether anyone in the galaxy was finally going to do something about it. Fleet Admiral Turvin Osul stood at the command spine of the Council warship Sovereign Resolve and watched the tactical feed update itself in real time. She was Drathari, tall and angular with pale silver skin and 4 narrow eyes that moved independently when her mind was working at full capacity. All 4 were moving now. The data flooding in from the Kelvath system was not the kind of data that invited calm. The colony on Kelvath Prime was burning. Turvin could read the thermal signatures from high orbit. Hundreds of structures on the surface were throwing up heat columns into the thin, cold atmosphere. This had been a quiet colony, Krellian agricultural settlers mostly, a modest Tuvari trading population alongside them. 3 generations had lived and worked and built lives in this system. They had filed all the right paperwork with the Council. They had paid their membership fees. They had done every single thing a peaceful colony was supposed to do. And none of it had mattered, because the Vethkai Dominion had decided this section of the border was inconvenient and they had come to rearrange it. "Admiral," said Mervyn, her tactical officer. He was young and Drathari, and still learning the discipline of delivering terrible news without letting the terrible part reach his voice. "I am reading 16 Vethkai warships holding low orbit around Kelvath Prime. 6 additional vessels are positioned at the system outer perimeter. They are running a sealing pattern, no traffic in or out." Turvin nodded once. "What is the surface status?" Population at last registry count was approximately 40,000. Sensors are reading energy discharge signatures consistent with heavy weapons use. Several of the northern farming settlements are no longer answering communication attempts. Mervyn paused and pressed his lips together briefly. "Casualty estimates are substantial, Admiral." Turvin closed her eyes for exactly 2 seconds. Then she opened them and looked at the bridge crew arrayed around her. They were watching her the way bridge crews watched admirals in moments exactly like this one, waiting for the shape of a plan, wishing quietly that the plan was going to be a good one. She did not have a comfortable plan to offer them. The Council fleet under her command was respectable. 9 warships, 2 heavy cruisers, a carrier with a full complement of strike craft against 16 Vethkai warships in defensive formation, plus 6 more sealing the perimeter. The Vethkai did not build elegant ships. They built ships the way you built a wall. Thick, dense, difficult. Their hulls were engineered to absorb punishment, and their weapons were engineered to deliver it. Elegance was someone else's problem. "Open a channel to the Vethkai command vessel," Turvin said. The communications officer, a young Tuvari named Sever, worked her console for a moment. "Channel open, Admiral." Turvin straightened her back and put every degree of calm she possessed into her voice. "Vethkai Fleet Command, this is Fleet Admiral Turvin Osul of the Galactic Council. You are in active violation of the Kelvath Neutrality Charter signed by your government 38 years ago. You are ordered to cease all hostile action immediately. Withdraw from Kelvath Prime orbit. Stand your vessels down. Any further harm inflicted upon this colony or its population will be treated by the Council as an open act of war. Respond." Silence stretched. Then a voice came back, deep, unhurried, carrying in it the particular quality of someone who had been winning long enough that the concept of someone telling them to stop had become genuinely amusing to them. "Admiral, you have arrived with 9 warships. We have 22. Your charter is a document that exists on paper. Kelvath is Vethkai territory now. Leave while the offer stands." The channel cut. Turvin's jaw set. She had expected exactly that. The Vethkai had been doing this kind of thing for 11 years. 11 years of border adjustments and occupation, and precisely calibrated aggression that stayed just inside what the Council felt able to respond to directly. The Council was very good at feeling unable to respond. It had an extraordinary number of committees whose primary function was the careful management of being unable to respond. "Admiral, this was Disson, her sensor officer. Quiet and methodical. A man who chose his words the way surgeons chose instruments. I am reading unusual energy signatures at the outer system boundary, beyond the Vethkai perimeter line." Turvin frowned. "Define unusual." Disson tapped at his console, then tapped again. The expression he wore was the expression of a professional who suspects his instruments are malfunctioning and is hoping one more check will confirm it. The energy pattern does not correspond to any drive signature in our database, Admiral. The output level is significantly beyond anything our own vessels produce. He paused. It is very large, and it is moving quickly. Considerably more quickly than its apparent mass would suggest is possible. Vethkai no, Admiral. The Vethkai outer ships are responding to it. They have broken their perimeter pattern and are turning to face the incoming signature. They do not appear to know what it is either. That was the detail that made Turvin step away from her chair and move directly to the main display. The Vethkai outer ships, 6 heavy warships, each one outmassing 2 of her own cruisers, they had abandoned their formation and turned to face something approaching from beyond the charted boundary, which meant the Vethkai were uncertain. The Vethkai were almost never uncertain. "What is the scale of this contact?" she asked. Descent checked his readings, checked them again. When he lifted his head, his face had done something she had never seen it do before. "Admiral, the object is approximately 11 kilometers in length." No one on the bridge spoke. Turvin heard the sound of the ventilation system. She heard her own breathing. 11 kilometers. The Sovereign Resolve was 890 meters from bow to stern, and it was considered a statement of considerable power. The largest vessel in the Vethkai arsenal was their command carrier, the Iron Fist Absolute, at 1.3 kilometers. 11 kilometers was not a warship. 11 kilometers was something that had no language yet to describe it. Mervyn said it quietly. "What is the largest Vethkai vessel?" "Their command carrier, Admiral, the Iron Fist Absolute, 1.3 kilometer, 1.3 against 11. Turvin stared at the display feed and said nothing, because there was nothing yet to say. The energy signature was strengthening. Every sensor update showed the same data. An enormous object approaching the outer boundary of the Kelvath system at a velocity that should not have been achievable by something of that mass. Physics had certain rules about mass and speed and the energy required to reconcile them. Whatever was approaching was treating those rules as optional, and Dis-Sen kept running his checks, kept looking for the error. No error appeared. "The Vethkai outer ships are transmitting a challenge signal," Sever reported from her station. "They are demanding the contact identify itself and halt under Vethkai military authority. Is the contact responding?" "Not yet, Admiral." The Vethkai outer formation shifted again. Turvin recognized the spread. She had seen it used before at other contested boundary incidents. Attack geometry. The kind of formation the Vethkai established when they intended to fire before the other side had finished deciding whether to fire. 3 other systems in the past decade had seen this formation. None of those encounters had gone well for the other side. She watched the formation complete itself across her display. Then she watched the enormous contact drop out of faster-than-light travel. The flash was wrong. Not the ordinary contained bloom of a vessel shedding transit energy. This was wide, sustained. It held for 4 full seconds before the display auto-compensated and the visual sensors finally had something solid to work with instead of raw energy bleed. The bridge became completely silent. What occupied space at the outer boundary of the Kelvath system was not a warship in any definition Turvin carried. It was a structure. A vast, dark, angular structure that filled the visual feed from one edge to the other and made the entire surrounding field of stars look like decoration placed around it. It was shaped in the manner of a long, swept blade, narrow at the forward end, widening into massive segmented hull sections toward the aft. The hull itself was nearly black with running lights, tracing orderly lines across its surface like a city scene from altitude on a very clear night. Weapons placements were visible even from this range, rows of them, dorsal and ventral, arranged with the density of something that had been built by people who understood that having one answer for every problem was insufficient. What appeared to be launch bays ran in columns along both flanks of the main hull, dozens of them, not 1 or 2, dozens. And at the rear the drive units were still shedding transit energy in a dull, persistent glow. Each drive unit, larger than several of the Council's destroyers stacked together. 11 kilometers of dark alloy floating in perfect stillness. Mervyn spoke, and his voice had lost every trace of its professional flatness. "Admiral, the Vethkai outer ships are going to weapons ready." "Of course they are." Turvin said it quietly. She had not looked away from the display. "What is our own posture?" "Weapons at standby, awaiting your order." She said nothing for a moment. She was watching the enormous ship and thinking about something that had occurred to her in the last 30 seconds. It had not fired. The Vethkai had moved into attack formation and armed every weapon they had, and the enormous vessel had done precisely nothing. It had arrived. It was present. It appeared to be waiting. It appeared to be entirely comfortable waiting. "Disson, is the contact running active scans on us?" "Yes, Admiral. Extremely thorough active scans." Disson looked up from his instruments. "Whatever sensor suite that vessel carries is significantly more capable than ours. The resolution and depth of what it is reading from this system is beyond anything our own instruments can produce. It is scanning everything. The colony, the Vethka ships, our fleet, everything." Turvin absorbed that. Advanced sensors, impossible size, speed that defied mass, complete calm in the presence of a combat formation, and no aggression. She was looking at something that had arrived in a system full of armed warships pointed at each other and had simply stopped and started reading. "Sever, is the contact broadcasting on any channel?" "No, Admiral. It is receiving. It took the Vethka challenge transmission. It has not responded to it." "Has it directed any communication toward us specifically?" "Not yet, Admiral." She watched the Vethka outer ships. They were still armed, still in formation, but they had not fired. She wondered what was holding them. Perhaps uncertainty. Perhaps the instinct that every species shared underneath its cultural overlay. The instinct that said something this quiet and this large was not something you started a fight with before you understood it. Or perhaps the Vethka outer commander was simply waiting for someone to explain to him what he was looking at before committing to the decision to destroy it. That question, what was it, was the only question anyone in this system was asking. Turvin moved to her command terminal and opened the Council Universal Registry. Every known spacefaring civilization had their vessels logged. Hull configurations, drive signatures, size classifications, all of it catalogued and cross-referenced. She ran the parameters herself. 11 kilometer. The drive signature descent had captured. The angular hull profile from the visual feed. The registry searched. The registry returned nothing. She ran it again. Broader this time. Any vessel within 50% of that length. Any drive profile within 40% of the readings. Any species known to have achieved faster than light travel not currently registered with the Council. Nothing. The registry returned. Nothing. She sat back and looked at the blank screen. And then she looked at the enormous dark shape on the visual feed. And she felt something that she had not felt since before she was an admiral. She felt genuinely and completely lost. Mervyn said, "Admiral." His voice was quiet and very careful. "The Vethkai outer command ship is transmitting again. Direct tight beam at the contact. Formal military identification demand under Vethkai fleet code." "Is the contact responding?" "No, Admiral." A pause. "Admiral, the contact is moving." Turvin brought her eyes back to the display. The enormous vessel was moving. Not toward the Vethkai laterally, across the outer boundary in a wide, deliberate arc. Moving slowly. Moving with the unhurried precision of something that had decided where it wanted to be, and was going there without any particular concern about what anyone else in the system thought about that. The arc was carrying it toward a position between the Kelveth system interior and the Vethkai fleet. Between the Vethkai fleet and the colony. Between the Vethkai guns and the 40,000 people on the surface. It was choosing its own position. It was doing so calmly and without permission. How to complete that arc?" Turvin asked. 7 minutes, Admiral, at current speed." 7 minutes. She sat with that. Then she said something she had not prepared. "I think it is here about the colony. She said it quietly, almost to herself. No one disagreed. No one could think of anything better to say. They watched the enormous vessel complete its arc. They watched the Vethkai outer ships hold position, and then slowly, without any formal order apparently being given, begin to pull back from the approaching shape. Not because they had been told to, not because a weapon had been aimed at them, but because 11 years of combat experience apparently told every Vethkai commander in that outer formation the same thing simultaneously. That whatever this was, you did not put yourself between it and the thing it was looking at. The Vethkai outer ships retreated to join the main fleet at Kelvil Prime orbit. The enormous vessel settled into its new position and held there. Running lights traced slow patterns across its hull in the visual feed. Turvin watched them and thought about what it meant that something this large had chosen this specific place to stand. Then, her communications console lit up. Sever turned from her station with an expression that Turvin had not seen on a Teveri before. Eyes wide, hands not quite steady, voice carefully precise in the way voices became when people were trying not to let anyone see how startled they were. Admiral, the unknown vessel is broadcasting. Open signal on galactic standard frequencies, directed at all vessels in the system. Turvin stood very straight. On speakers. The voice that came through the bridge was calm, unhurried. It belonged to a biological creature, something that breathed and spoke with a jaw and a tongue and vocal cords. And it carried in it a very specific quality. The quality of someone who was not rushing because there was nothing in the immediate environment that constituted a meaningful threat to them. This is Commander Rael Sorin of the United World Ship Dominion of Reach. It said to every vessel in the Kelvath system, "We are aware of the situation on the surface. We are here to observe. We ask that all parties hold their current positions. We will be in contact shortly." The transmission ended. The bridge was very quiet. Turvin looked at Sever. "Run that name through every database we carry." Sever ran it. "No results, Admiral. No match in any species registry. No match in any language catalog. The name structure is not recognized." Turvin had expected that. She looked at the enormous dark vessel on the display, the Dominion of Reach. She did not know what those words referred to. She did not know what United Worlds meant, or who Commander Rael Sorin was, or what species spoke with a voice like that, steady and even, and carrying underneath the calm something that was not quite warmth, but was in the vicinity of it. Completely unafraid. She knew one thing. Whatever happened next, the Kelvath system had just become the most important location in the galaxy, and she did not think that was going to change for a long time. The silence after the transmission lasted exactly 5 seconds. Then everyone on the bridge of the Sovereign Resolve began talking at the same time, and Turvin had to cut through all of it with a sharp, raised hand. The crew settled, but she could see it in their bodies, the tension, the recalibration happening behind their eyes. She understood. She was doing the same thing. But she was the Admiral, and the Admiral was not permitted to show it. Mervyn, full sensor sweep on the contact. Everything we have. Hull composition, weapons inventory, life sign analysis, everything. Already running, Admiral. Sever, I need a priority encrypted channel to Council High Command. Opening it now, Admiral. Descent, that drive signature. I want it cross-referenced against every database on this vessel. Pre-Council records, theoretical models, old survey archives, everything that exists. Yes, Admiral. She turned back to the main display and studied the enormous ship. It had not moved since the broadcast. It sat at the boundary of the inner system in the position it had chosen for itself. Running lights pulsing their slow, steady patterns across the hull. Drive units cooling from the transit. Patient was the word that kept coming to her, even though it was absurd to describe something 11 kilometers long as patient. But that was exactly what it looked like. A thing that had arrived precisely where it intended to arrive, and was now entirely comfortable with whatever came next. That was interesting by itself. Most vessels arriving in disputed territory with that kind of firepower either asserted themselves immediately or retreated to a cautious distance. This vessel had done something else entirely. It had moved to a specific position, placed itself as an unmistakable obstacle between the Vethkai and the colony, then announced itself briefly and told everyone to hold still. It had a plan, and it was in no particular rush to execute it. The Vethkai, for their part, were doing something Turvin had almost never seen them do, staying still. All 22 Vethka warships remained in formation around Kelvath Prime and at the outer positions. They had not fired, they had not advanced, they had sent no further challenge transmissions. They were sitting in their positions and staring at their own sensor feeds and trying to understand what they were looking at, the same as everyone else. Mervyn completed his initial sweep and turned with his report. Admiral, hull composition on the contact is partially readable. The outer layer is a metal alloy not present in our materials catalog. The density is considerably higher than standard military hull plating, approximately 3 times the density of our best composite armor. There is also what appears to be an energy field integrated into the hull itself. Not a standard shield geometry, more layered, more continuous. Weapon installations along dorsal and ventral hull surfaces. Mervyn paused. I can identify over 200 distinct weapons emplacements, Admiral. There are additional structures I cannot classify with certainty. They may be further weapon types or support systems I do not have a reference frame for. Launch bays are clearly readable. I count 46 of them. Each bay appears capable of housing multiple craft. Turvin processed that. Life sign readings. The biological signature configuration is consistent with an oxygen-breathing, carbon-based crew. However, the crew density is very low for a vessel of this size. I am reading approximately 6,000 life signs across the full length, 6,000 on 11 kilometers. The Sovereign Resolve carried 750 crew across 890 messen. Scaled by volume alone, something the size of the Dominion of Reach should carry tens of thousands, unless the vessel was heavily automated, unless the crew had been kept deliberately small to manage systems that simply did not require large numbers of people to operate. Council High Command is on the line, Admiral, Sever announced. Turvin moved to the encrypted terminal and pressed the contact point. The face that appeared was High Counselor Varuth, an older Drathari, silver and composed in the manner of someone who had spent so many decades in political positions that looking calm had become more than a discipline. It had become structural. Admiral Osul, we are receiving your sensor data. This vessel, you have no identification on it. None, Counselor. No registry match. No drive signature match. No hull material match. The commander identified the vessel as the Dominion of Reach and gave his own name. Neither appears in any database we carry. Varuth's expression did not shift, but one of his eyes moved, the small involuntary movement that Drathari politicians never entirely eliminated. He was considerably more unsettled than he was showing. And its current behavior, stationary, no hostile action. It has positioned itself between the Vethkai fleet and the colony. Since then, it has held position and made no further move. And the Vethkai are holding. They appear uncertain, Counselor. A pause. Varuth looked at something beyond the frame and then back. Admiral, your standing orders remain in effect. Protect the colony. Exercise considerable caution with respect to this unknown vessel. Do not approach without further information. Do not provoke it. Find out what it is. Yes, Counselor. The line closed. Turvin turned back to the bridge. Disson, anything from the database cross-reference? Disson looked up from his work, and the expression he was wearing was one she was going to remember for the rest of her career. It was the expression of a careful and precise man who had just found a data point that did not fit inside any of the categories he had spent his professional life constructing. Admiral, I found something. It is old, and it is not from any official source. Show me. He transferred the file to her command display. It was a pre-council record, at minimum 300 years old. It came from the archived survey logs of a minor Krellian exploration vessel that had apparently traveled well beyond the currently charted regions of space. The record was incomplete and badly degraded by time. But there was a passage in it that had triggered Disson's cross-reference parameters. She read it. The Krellian surveyor, had logged detecting at extreme long range what it described as a moving structure of incomprehensible scale. The surveyor had not approached it. The surveyor had recorded the detection and then spent 3 paragraphs documenting its reasoning for turning around and returning home. The energy signature in the log was not a precise match to what they were reading now, but it was close enough that Disson's search had flagged it. At the base of the record was an annotation added by a Krellian archivist at some later date. It read, "Surveyor Captain Testimony reviewed and logged. No corroborating data. No follow-up mission conducted. Classification unverified." 300 years ago, Turvin said it quietly, more to herself than to anyone. They have been out there for at least 300 years. That would appear to be the case, Admiral, possibly considerably longer. The surveyor log is the oldest record I located. But if they have been traveling beyond the charted regions for that duration, they may have been active much earlier and simply never crossed paths with anyone who filed a report, or anyone who survived to file one. Dissent said it carefully. Turvin noted the implication and kept it behind her expression. Movement on the display, not the main Veth-Kai fleet. The 6 ships that had formed the outer perimeter had separated from the main body and were now moving slowly and deliberately toward the Dominion of Reach. Not in full attack geometry, in the probe spread. The formation the Veth-Kai used when they wanted to get sensor resolution on a target before committing to engagement. Veth-Kai outer ships advancing on the contact. Mervyn confirmed. Probe formation. They appear to be conducting a close sensor pass. What is the contact doing? Nothing, Admiral. Still stationary. The 6 Veth-Kai ships crept forward to 300 kilometers from the Dominion of Reach and slowed. Turvin watched their sensor emissions ramp up on her display. They were scanning, doing the same thing she had done, trying to understand what this thing was. Then one of them did what the Veth-Kai did. A single forward cannon pulse, not a full salvo, a ranging shot. The kind of probe discharge they used when they were unsure whether something was a threat or debris. Fire a controlled burst and watch the response. The pulse crossed the gap and impacted the hull of the Dominion of Reach. Nothing happened. No explosion. No secondary discharge. No visible scoring on the hull surface. No structural response of any kind. The energy pulse arrived and stopped. The hull did not breach. The running lights did not flicker. The weapons emplacements did not activate. The enormous vessel absorbed the impact the way a very large object absorbs the arrival of something very small, with no apparent consequence, with no apparent awareness. The 6 Veth-Kai ships stopped moving entirely. A long stillness settled across the Kelveth system. Then the Dominion of Reach spoke, addressed directly to the vessel that had fired. Commander Soren's voice said, "That was not necessary. We are not here for you. We are here about the colony. We suggest you return to your formation and wait. This will be resolved shortly." The transmission ended. One Veth-Kai ship began backing away, then a second, then a third. By the end, all 6 were in retreat toward the main fleet. They were not doing it in any organized or dignified manner. They were doing it the way ships backed away, when the crew had collectively decided, without any formal order being given, that their current position was somewhere they did not want to be anymore. On the bridge of the Sovereign Resolve, someone exhaled very slowly and very shakily. Turvin did not look to see who. She understood the feeling entirely. Admiral Sever said, and her voice was now operating at maximum precision, the way voices did when people were choosing every syllable. "The Dominion of Reach is hailing us directly. Type beam addressed specifically to this vessel." Turvin straightened in her chair. On speakers. "Fleet Admiral Osel, this is Commander Soren of the Dominion of Reach. We have assessed the situation in this system. We understand you are present on behalf of the Galactic Council in response to the Veth-Kai incursion. We would like to coordinate. Are you available to speak directly?" Turvin looked at her crew. They looked back. Every face asked the same question. What do we do now? There was no handbook for this, no council protocol. No training scenario that had included this specific configuration of events. There was only the situation and herself, and her judgment. She pressed the open channel control. "Commander Soren, this is Admiral Osel. We are available. Before we proceed, I must ask, who are you? Where are you from? Your vessel and your name do not match any record I have access to." A brief pause, then the voice again. And now there was something beneath the calm, something very quiet and very slight that might have been the distant edge of amusement. "Admiral, we are human. We come from a planet called Earth. We are aware that we are not in your registry. That is something we have been intending to address for some time." Another brief pause. "We think this situation may be a suitable occasion to do so." Turvin sat with that for a moment. Human. She turned the word over. It was a translation, not a word in any language she knew. Earth, a planet that appeared on no chart she had ever reviewed. "Human," she said at last, mostly to herself. "Yes, Admiral." The voice was patient. Very patient. "We will explain everything. In the meantime, we would ask the Council fleet to hold its position and allow us to address the Vethka situation. We believe we can resolve it without unnecessary harm to anyone involved." Turvin looked at the Vethka fleet on her display. 22 warships, a burning colony, 40,000 people on the surface. She thought about the ranging shot, the one that had accomplished nothing. She thought about 6 Vethkai warships retreating from a single vessel without being fired upon. She pressed the channel control. "Commander Soren, the Council fleet will hold position." "Thank you, Admiral." The channel closed. Turvin sat in her chair and looked at the enormous ship and thought. She thought about the 300-year-old Krellian survey record. She thought about what it meant that something this vast had been operating beyond charted space for that long. She thought about the word human. She thought about a planet called Earth on no chart she had ever seen. She thought about 6,000 people crewing a ship built like a small moon, and what kind of civilization builds something like that, and why. After 300 years of watching from the dark, they had chosen today to step forward. She was still thinking about all of it when the Vethkai fleet made its next move, and that was when everything truly began. The invitation came 23 minutes after the final transmission. A short, precise message from the Dominion of Reach addressed directly to the Sovereign Resolve. Signed by Commander Rael Soren, it proposed that a small delegation from the Council fleet might wish to come aboard for a direct briefing. It indicated that a shuttle bay on the port side of the vessel at the midship mark would be made available for arrival. It included approach coordinates so precise that Turvin's navigation officer could calculate the transit path without any additional work. The bridge crew looked at Admiral Osel. She looked at the coordinates. She looked at the enormous vessel. She looked at the Vethkai fleet which had in the last 23 minutes not fired on the colony again. She was not certain if they were waiting to see what the strange vessel would do, or waiting for better odds, or simply doing what everyone else in the system was doing, which was watching. She made a decision. She took Mervyn, her tactical officer, and Descent, her sensor officer, and Sever, her communications officer, and 4 soldiers from the security detail. She considered notifying Council High Command before departing. She decided against it. Councillor Varith would need too much time to deliberate and would very likely instruct her not to go, and she was not prepared to receive that instruction right now. She ordered a shuttle made ready. The shuttle departed the Sovereign Resolve and crossed the gap. Turvin sat in the forward passenger seat and watched the Dominion of Reach grow in the viewport. At distance, it had been enormous. Up close as the shuttle approached, and the scale resolved itself from data and sensor readings into something her own eyes could process, it became something different. Something that the word enormous was not adequate to contain. The hull was not smooth. Deep channels and recessed sections ran along its entire length. As the shuttle followed the midship line, she could see that many of these recessed areas held additional installations, secondary sensor arrays, communication emitters, Maintenance access bays large enough to accept a mid-capacity transport vessel. The metal itself was nearly black in the shade cast by the ship's own bulk, but where the starlight caught it at a favorable angle, it had texture, a structural pattern visible in the alloy itself. The look of something that had been built to outlast, not a mission, but an era. The shuttle found the indicated bay. The doors were already open, two enormous blast doors, each one larger than the entire shuttle deck of the Sovereign Resolve, sliding apart to reveal a lit interior. The bay was vast, warm-lit, clean, large enough to hold a dozen council shuttles side by side with space remaining. And as they descended and settled on the deck, Tarvin could see a small group of figures waiting. The humans. She had tried to prepare herself during the transit. She had thought about what first contact with an unknown species actually looked like. She had steeled herself for something unfamiliar, something genuinely alien. She had not expected something so close to recognizable. 6 of them stood on the deck as the shuttle ramp descended. Bipedal, 2 legs, 2 arms, 1 head. The head was differently proportioned from a Drathari, smaller, more rounded. Eyes positioned forward in a configuration that suggested an evolutionary history in which judging distances accurately had mattered a great deal. The eyes varied. 2 were dark. 1 was pale. 1 was somewhere between brown and amber. They had no scales. Smooth skin across a range of shades, from very light to a deep, warm brown. They were on average not as tall as a Drathari, and not as long in the limb. But they stood in the way that commanding officers stood across all species she had ever encountered. Upright, relaxed, entirely at home. The one in front was slightly taller than the others. His uniform was dark and fitted with collar and sleeve markings she read as rank indicators. His hair was dark and worn close. His face was composed. His eyes, when they met hers as she descended the ramp, were steady and dark brown. They held the same quality she had heard in his voice through the communication channel. Not aggressive, not triumphant, not guarded, simply present. He stepped forward and extended one open hand toward her, palm up. No weapons held, no threat implied. A gesture she had seen variations of in several species she knew. A greeting. "Admiral Osel," he said. His galactic standard was flawless. Not the flawless of someone translating from memory, but the flawless of someone who had been using the language for years and had absorbed its rhythms entirely. "I am Commander Rael Soren of the United World Ship Dominion of Reach. Thank you for coming." She hesitated only briefly before completing the gesture. His grip was firm and then released. "Commander Soren, thank you for the invitation." She studied his face carefully. "Your galactic standard is exceptional. We have had considerable time to practice it." The very slight thing in his voice again. "Please come with me. There is a briefing room prepared. I suspect you have many questions." That, she said, is a significant understatement. He smiled. She saw it clearly this time. It moved through his face and changed it, made it more open, more genuine. She had seen that expression on Drathari and on Krellians and on Tuvari. Whatever else humans were, they were a species that smiled. She followed him through the bay door and into the interior of the Dominion of Reach. The corridors were wide without being excessive. 6 or 7 people could walk abreast without crowding. The ceilings were generous. The lighting was warm and consistent, and had the feel of something chosen deliberately rather than purely functional. There was script on the wall placards she did not recognize, a flowing, angular writing system, and below each one, a galactic standard translation. Accurate enough that it had been written by someone who genuinely understood the language and not simply mapped it through a conversion dictionary. The crew they passed looked at the delegation with open and unashamed curiosity. Not hostility, not weariness, curiosity. Turvin looked back. She saw the variety, different skin shades, different heights, hair in different colors and lengths, all in the same dark uniform, all moving with the purposeful economy of trained military personnel. But there was something beyond that in how they moved through this ship. An ease, a comfort. The particular quality of crew who have spent enough time aboard a vessel that it has become genuinely home. Commander Sorin brought them to a briefing room that was modest in scale relative to the rest of the vessel. A long table, chairs clearly designed around human proportions, but with adjustable sections that had been reconfigured to accommodate Drathari proportions. She could see the adjustment marks. They had known who was coming. They had prepared for who was coming. She found her seat. Sorin settled across from her. His officers took their positions around the table. Her crew arranged themselves at her side. "I will begin with the most fundamental question," Turvin said, "because if I do not ask it first, I will not be able to engage properly with anything else. How long have you been in this galaxy?" Sorin glanced briefly at his officers. Something exchanged between them without words. Then he looked back at her. "Our species evolved on a planet called Earth, in a star system we call Sol, located in the inner regions of the galaxy. We achieved interstellar travel approximately 300 years ago by our own calendar. Since then, we have been exploring." "Exploring?" Turvin repeated. "For 300 years without making contact with any known civilization." "We made contact with several civilizations," Sorin said. "Some of those contacts were not peaceful. We learned early that approaching unknown societies required considerable care and time." He paused. "We have been observing the galactic community for a significant portion of those 300 years, learning your languages, your histories, your political structures, your conflicts. We chose to wait until we were confident we could engage in a manner that was constructive." Turvin looked at him steadily. "You have been watching for 300 years and said nothing while the Veth Kai expanded, while colonies were taken, while the Council debated and filed reports and formed committees." Sorin's expression did not move from his. He held her gaze. "We were watching," he said, "and learning and building." "Building what?" He looked at her for a moment, then he said simply, "This." She sat with that. 300 years of building. 300 years of what those ancient Krellian surveyors had seen from far away and decided not to approach. She thought about the hull readings. 3 times the density of the best armor in the Council's arsenal. Over 200 weapons emplacements, 46 launch bays, 6,000 crew managing a vessel 11 kilometer long. And this was one ship. "How many ships do you have?" she asked. Sorin looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "Admiral, I think there are more immediate matters we should address first. There is still a burning colony in this system and a Veth Kai fleet in orbit around it." She recognized the deferral, deliberate, carefully placed. He was not ready to answer that question yet. She noted it and moved. "What is your intention regarding the Veth Kai?" "We intend to ask them to leave," Sorin said. She waited for more. More did not come immediately. "That is all. That is the first part. If they comply, no further action is required. The colony will be assessed for relief needs, which we are equipped to assist with. Council authority over Kelvath will be recognized and supported." He folded his hands on the table. "If they do not comply, the situation will require a different approach. But I would prefer to try the conversation first." "The Veth Kai," said Turvin carefully, "do not have a strong history of responding constructively to requests they find inconvenient." "I am aware," Sorin said. "I've been reading your historical records for quite some time, Admiral." Disson leaned forward slightly, careful and methodical as always in asking the careful, methodical question. "Commander Sorin, the energy discharge from the Veth Kai probe ship earlier, when they fired the ranging shot at your hull, you appeared to sustain no damage. Can you explain the mechanism?" Sorin looked at the sensor officer. "Our hull composition and shield integration are products of 300 years of development. Officer Disson, I will say that the discharge the Veth Kai probe fired at us carried approximately the energy output we would classify as a light pulse from a close-range point defense weapon. It was not a significant concern for this vessel." Disson sat back. Turvan watched her sensor officer working through the implications. The Vethkai probe ships were not small vessels. Their forward cannon was not a small weapon. If that qualified as a point defense light pulse by human assessment standards, then what did the Dominion of Reach classify as an actual threat? She found she genuinely wanted to know. She also found she was slightly afraid of the answer. Commander Mervyn said, "Unable to contain himself, the weapons emplacements along your hull. Can you give me any classification on them?" Soren looked at the tactical officer. "We employ several categories. Kinetic rail drivers, energy projection weapons across multiple frequency bands, missile delivery systems, and some additional systems I am not going to describe in detail at this time." He paused. "The short version, Officer Mervyn, is that they are adequate for our operational requirements." Mervyn stared at him, then sat back and said nothing. Sever spoke next. "The practical question from the practical mind. Commander, you intend to ask the Vethkai to leave. You have indicated that Council authority in this system will be supported. Does that mean you intend to operate within the Council structure going forward?" "That is our intention." Soren's voice was the same as it had been throughout, even clear, without pride or performance. "Humanity's intent is not to replace or diminish the galactic community. Our intent is to join it." He paused. "As a full member with all that implies." Turvan looked at him. He looked back. She thought about everything. 300 years, the ship she was sitting inside, the 6,000 crew, the weapons, the hull that had absorbed a cannon blast with no discernible effect. She thought about the word member. She thought about what every species in the galactic community was going to experience when this information reached them. That a civilization had been operating in this galaxy for 3 centuries, and none of them had known. She thought about High Counselor Vareth and his carefully maintained composure, and she thought that composure was going to face a significant challenge when she delivered her full report. "I have one more question," she said. Soren waited. "Why now? Of all the moments available in 300 years, why this system? Why this incident? Why today?" Soren was quiet for a moment. He looked at the table. When he looked up, his voice was still steady, but it carried something now that had not been there in the earlier exchanges, something quieter, more personal. "Because 40,000 people are on that surface," he said, "and they are dying, and we are here, and we can stop it, and there is no longer any reason sufficient to wait." The briefing room was completely still. Turvan looked at him for a long moment. She thought about 300 years of watching without acting. She thought about what that must have taken. She thought about whatever had finally broken it. "All right," she said. "Then let us go speak to the Vethkai." Commander Rael Soren rose from his chair, and for the first time since she had come aboard, the careful, steady patience in his bearing shifted into something more purposeful. He nodded once, and they went. The transmission to the Vethkai fleet was sent from the Dominion of Reach at the same moment that Turvan's shuttle departed, for the return to the Sovereign Resolve. Soren had been clear in the briefing room that the Council fleet should be back in formation before the communication went out. Turvan had appreciated the consideration. She had not fully understood the reasoning until she was settled back into her command chair and watching the events unfold on display. He had told her in the briefing room what he intended to say. He had described it without drama. "We will ask them to withdraw. We will give them a clear window of time. We will make the consequences of not complying completely plain, and we will mean every word of it." She had asked whether he expected the Vethkai to comply. He had considered that briefly. People who have been winning uncontested for a long time need to see something very clearly before they accept that the situation has changed. "We intend to show them clearly." The transmission text appeared on her display as Seva pulled it through. It was brief. "To Vethkai Fleet Command, Kelvath System. This is Commander Rael Soren, United Worlds Ship Dominion of Reach. You are ordered to cease all hostile action against the population of Kelvath Prime. You are ordered to withdraw your fleet from this system within 2 standard hours. This colony is under the protection of the Galactic Council, and as of this moment under the protection of humanity. Non-compliance will result in the use of force. We recommend compliance. Commander Riel Soran, United World Ship, Dominion of Reach. That was all. No committee language, no list of grievances, no diplomatic hedging. 2 hours leave, or we will use force. The Vethkai response took 9 minutes. She could imagine the debate aboard their command vessel. She could picture the officers staring at their sensor feeds and arguing about what the Dominion of Reach was, and what it could actually do, and whether the ranging shot result was a genuine capability demonstration or an anomaly. She could picture the fleet commander at the end of all of that reaching the same conclusion Vethkai commanders had reached at every border incident for 11 years. That obstacles were meant to be removed. The Vethkai fleet moved. All of them. All 22 warships began to shift, and Mervyn read the formation change with the disciplined, flat voice of an officer who was not allowing himself to think about what he was seeing. Vethka fleet transitioning to full combat configuration, Admiral. All vessels advancing on the Dominion of Reach. Weapons going active across all 22 ships. Understood, Turvin said. What is the Dominion doing? Stationary, Admiral. No response observed. 22 Vethka warships, the largest being the command carrier Iron Fist Absolute at 1.3 kilometers. All of them forming up and bearing down on a single vessel. She wanted to open a channel to Soren. She was not sure what she would say. Be careful seemed both insufficient and somehow condescending given everything she had seen. She held still and watched. The Vethka closed to 1,000 kilometers. Standard Vethka opening engagement distance. Their forward batteries operated at their most effective at this range. She had seen the results of Vethka forward batteries at 1,000 kilometers, and the images were not comfortable. The Vethka fleet opened fire. Not a probe shot, not a single pulse. A coordinated volley from 22 warships timed to arrive simultaneously. Forward batteries, energy beams, kinetic rounds, missile salvos, all of it launched together and crossing the gap toward the Dominion of Reach. Turvin had seen this kind of combined barrage used against hardened planetary defense platforms designed specifically to withstand it. The platforms had not withstood it. The salvos arrived. The visual feed went entirely white. The combined energy output of 22 warships' batteries striking a single hull at the same moment created a light event large enough that her displays auto-dimmed to protect the optics. Turvin waited. The light held, then it faded. The displays updated. The Dominion of Reach was there. It was completely and entirely undamaged. No hull breach, no debris, no secondary systems failing, no change in the running lights on its surface. The weapons had arrived, and the hull had processed them the same way the first ranging shot had been processed, without consequence, without acknowledgement, as if 22 warships had fired everything they had, and the result was simply nothing. Nobody on the bridge said anything at all. For 3 seconds, the Dominion of Reach did not respond. Turvin thought about those 3 seconds. The moment between receiving what an entire enemy fleet had decided to throw at you and deciding how to answer it. She thought about what it felt like to take that, and know it had not moved you in any measurable way. Then the Dominion of Reach moved. It moved fast. The speed was genuinely wrong for something its size. 11 kilometers had no legitimate claim to that kind of velocity, but it moved anyway, closing the engagement distance in a time that left the Vethkai formation trying to recalculate targeting solutions for a contact that was already somewhere else entirely. The Dominion swept laterally, across the Vethkai formation in a long, arcing pass, and as it moved, it fired. Not everything, not the full weight of 200 weapons, emplacements, and whatever else was in those unclassified installations. Turvin watched the fire pattern and could see, even at this distance, that the was being deliberate, selective, choosing. Drive systems. It was targeting drive systems. The first shot found the Iron Fist Absolute, and the command carrier's port drive array went dark, not destroyed. The carrier was not destroyed. No explosion, no hull breach. The drive array was simply no longer functioning. The carrier lurched sideways as its thrust balance collapsed. The second shot took the drives from a Vethkai heavy cruiser, then another cruiser, then 4 escort vessels in rapid sequence. The speed of acquisition was beyond what a single targeting operator could manage. The system was partially automated and very, very precise. In under 20 seconds, 7 Vethkai ships were motionless in space, intact, fully staffed, completely operational in every way, except the ability to move or flee. Tarvin watched the display. "Mervin," she said carefully, "is the Dominion targeting weapon systems, sensors, life support?" Mervin answered quietly, slowly, as if he was choosing each word with individual care. "No, Admiral. Exclusively drive and propulsion systems on every vessel contacted. No crew casualties detectable. No weapons destruction. No sensor damage. No structural damage to any hull." "It is grounding them," Tarvin said. "Yes, Admiral. Specifically, it is making them unable to leave and unable to maneuver." She held that for a moment. The Dominion of Reach had absorbed the complete combined barrage of 22 warships and had then moved into that formation and begun methodically removing each ship's ability to go anywhere. It was not trying to destroy the Vethkai fleet. It was trying to immobilize it. And in doing so, it was making something clear, that it could have done the other thing at any point and had chosen not to. The 13 remaining mobile Vethka ships were reacting. Some trying to maneuver clear, some forming a defensive cluster, 2 still firing even though their fire was achieving exactly what all the previous fire had achieved, which was nothing at all. The Dominion moved through the formation with the quality of something that knew precisely where every threat was and precisely where every threat was not. Firing when it needed to, repositioning when it needed to, not hurrying. Then Turvin's display filled with new contacts. Not Vethka, not Council fleet, new, multiple contacts dropping out of faster than light at the outer boundary of the Kelveth system in rapid succession. The same energy signature as the Dominion, the same enormous transit bloom, the same impossible drive profile. "Admiral Dissin," said, and his voice was operating at extreme precision. "I am reading additional human vessels entering the system. I count." He paused. "I count 14 additional contacts, Admiral. Size class. Variable. The smallest appear to be in the 3 to 4 kilometers range. There are 4 vessels in the 6 to 8 kilometer range, and there are 3 contacts that are larger than the Dominion of Reach. Sensor readings suggest 15 to 16 kilometers. 15 to 16 kilometers. Larger than the Dominion." Turvin looked at her display and watched 14 enormous human warships arrange themselves across the outer boundary of the Kelveth system. They did not advance on the ongoing engagement. They held a wide distributed formation that sealed every viable exit from the system. If anything in the Kelveth system attempted to jump to faster than light transit, it would have to pass through that formation first. They were not joining the fight. They were ensuring nothing left. Turvin understood something in that moment, with a clarity that was almost physically uncomfortable. The humans had not needed 14 additional ships to handle the Vethkai fleet. The Dominion of Reach had been demonstrating that for the past several minutes, entirely on its own. These ships were not reinforcements. This was an announcement. This was humanity stepping forward and saying without any possible ambiguity that they were present, that they were organized, that what the galaxy was watching was not one vessel that had decided to act. This was a fleet. This was a decision. This was a civilization that had decided today was the day. In the main engagement, the Vethkai fleet count of mobile ships dropped to 10, to 6, to 3. The Dominion worked through them with the same methodical precision. Drives gone, propulsion dead, ships drifting. The Vethkai continued to fire. They seemed unable to stop, but their weapons accomplished exactly what all previous weapons had accomplished, which was nothing. The last mobile Vethkai ship tried to run. Full drives, maximum thrust, heading for the system edge at top speed. The Dominion did not pursue it. It did not need to. One of the smaller human vessels at the outer boundary moved to intercept, matched the Vethkai ship speed without apparent effort, positioned itself directly in the vessel's path, and held there. The Vethkai ship had 2 choices: fire on the human vessel blocking the route, which it did, and which had no discernible effect on the human vessel, or stop. After several seconds of attempting the first option, it stopped. Turvin looked at her display. 22 HFY warships going nowhere. She thought about every council session she had sat through, every debate about whether to send 2 ships or 3 to a HFY border incident, every committee deliberation about the appropriate level of formal response, every compromise that had resulted in a strongly worded communication and no meaningful action. She thought about how many colonies might have survived intact if at any point in the last 11 years someone had simply arrived and quietly and without malice removed the HFY fleet's ability to go anywhere. The Dominion of Reach settled to rest in the center of the drifting HFY formation, surrounded on all sides by warships that had fired everything they carried at it, surrounded by the result. Soren's voice came over the open channel. HFY Fleet Command, your ships are immobilized. No crew members have been harmed. We have no intention of destroying your vessels or harming your personnel. You are currently unable to leave this system until we choose to permit it. A pause. We are going to send a transport to the surface of Kelvath Prime to begin relief operations for the colony. While that is underway, we ask that you remain where you are and consider the conversation we are going to have when relief operations are complete. That conversation will involve the withdrawal of HFY forces from all territories taken in the past 11 years, reparations to damaged colonies, and a formal binding agreement on future border conduct with real consequences for violations. A shorter pause. We are not asking for surrender. We are asking for negotiation. There is a meaningful difference. Given the current circumstances, we think you may find negotiation considerably more comfortable than the alternative. The HFY fleet said nothing. Turvin's communication console lit. Park on the direct channel. Admiral Osel, we are beginning surface operations on Kelvath Prime. We have medical personnel and supply resources available. We would welcome coordination with the Council fleet on relief distribution. Turvin looked at her bridge crew. She read in their faces everything she was feeling herself. The shock, the recalibration, the attempt to place the last 40 minutes inside any framework that made sense. There was no framework. Something new had happened. Something the existing frameworks had not been built to hold. Commander Soren, she said into the channel. She kept her voice level. The Council fleet will coordinate on relief operations. We have medical teams ready. Thank you, Admiral. A pause. The vessels at the system boundary. Those are all human ships. She said it as a statement. Yes, and there are more beyond what you are seeing here. She looked at her display. 15 human warships in the Kelvath system. 22 immobilized HFY warships going nowhere. A colony waiting for help that was now finally arriving. And beyond the edge of the charted regions, more human ships. She exhaled slowly and straightened in her chair. Begin relief coordination, she told her crew. All departments stand down from combat readiness and prepare to support surface operations. They moved. They were good people, her crew. They moved. Turvin kept her eyes on the display for one more moment, on the dark shape of the Dominion of Reach at the center of the system. Patient, present, as if it had always been there and intended to remain. She thought about the galaxy she had known yesterday, the maps, the borders, the carefully maintained record of what everyone had and what everyone wanted. Then she thought about the galaxy she was sitting in right now. They were not the same galaxy. She did not think they would ever be the same galaxy again. The relief operations on Kelvath Prime took 33 hours. Turvin did not sleep during that time. She was not certain any of her bridge crew slept. They rotated through their stations. They coordinated with the human medical teams. They watched the enormous vessels in the center of the system. And they thought. And when they looked at each other, they exchanged the particular expression of people who had witnessed something that had permanently reorganized their understanding of what the world contained. The human medical teams were thorough. That was the word Turvin kept returning to. They arrived on the surface in transports descending from the Dominion's launch bays in groups of 4 and 6. They brought not only personnel, but supplies. Her logistics officer, A careful Drafari named Varus spent an entire hour cataloging the offloaded material, and then came to Turvin with the catalog and said with great precision, "Admiral, they brought medical material sufficient for a population approximately 3 times the size of this colony. They appear to have prepared this in advance of arrival." Turvin looked at the catalog and said, "Yes, I believe they did," which meant they had known about Kelvath before arriving, which meant their monitoring had been detailed enough to know not just that the incursion was happening, but how severe it was, which meant the Dominion's arrival was not coincidence. It was deliberate, chosen. They had come specifically because they had decided this was the moment, and this was the place. 33 hours. The injured were stabilized. The fires were extinguished. The northern settlements that had gone dark on the sensor feed were reached on the ground, and the human teams reported back through the coordination channel that Sever had established between the fleets. The reports used clinical numbers and medical terminology and logistics data, but underneath all of it was the same story. People who had been dying were alive. People who had been afraid were being helped. The colony of Kelveth Prime was going to survive this. On the second morning, the negotiations with the Vethka began. Turvin was present. She sat at a table inside a large conference room on the Dominion of Reach that had not been there during the delegation's first visit. It had been specifically configured. The right furniture for several different species, space for a significant number of representatives. The Vethka fleet commander came in person. He was a large individual, as Vethka commanders tended to be. Deep gray-green, heavily constructed, with the specific physical presence of someone who had spent their entire adult life in military command. He sat across from Sorin and assessed him with the flat, measuring gaze of someone reading an opponent. Sorin looked back at him with the same quiet patience he had shown in every interaction Turvin had witnessed. The Vethka commander's name was Drevath. 39 years in Vethka military service, 4 border operations. This was his 4th. He did not speak immediately. He looked at Sorin. He looked at Turvin. He looked at the table. He looked at his own hands. Then he looked back at Sorin. What you want, he said. Withdrawal from all territories taken in the past 11 years, Sorin said. His voice was exactly the same as it had been in every previous conversation, even clear, without heat or satisfaction. Complete withdrawal, not phased, not partial, completed within 60 days. Verification by council mapping teams. Compliance will be confirmed. Drevath said nothing. Reparations to the affected colonies, Sorin continued. The council will determine the figure. It will be paid by the Veth Chai government within a reasonable timeline. Drevath still said nothing. A formal binding agreement on border conduct going forward with verification mechanisms and with consequences for violations. He paused. Consequences that will include us. The room was quiet. Drevath looked at the table. He looked like a man doing a calculation. A man who had spent his career being very skilled at a particular kind of calculation. The kind that involved warships and firepower, and who could take what from whom and who was now confronted with a new variable in that calculation that changed every answer he arrived at. His ships were outside, stationary, drives gone, crews intact, vessels undamaged except for the precision removal of propulsion systems. And standing just beyond the edge of the charted community were more human ships. How many more? Nobody at this table could say except the calm man across from him. You are asking me to ratify the surrender of 11 years of Veth Chi territorial advancement, Drevath said. His voice was low, not angry exactly. The voice of someone working through an unwelcome arithmetic. Yes, on behalf of the Veth Chi government, which I do not represent at this table, you are the senior Vethkai commander present in this system. The agreement you sign here will be transmitted to your government with our recommendation that it be honored. The alternative is that we transmit the complete sensor record of this engagement to every government in the galactic community and begin a formal conversation with the Council about border protection measures that will involve us directly. Soren's voice was still even, still patient. We would prefer not to do that. We would prefer to allow your government the opportunity to make this choice independently. Another silence. Dreveth looked at Soren for a long time. You could have destroyed my fleet, he said at last. It was not a complaint. It was a factual observation that he had clearly been carrying since the moment the engagement ended. Yes, Soren said. Why did you not? Soren thought about the question. When he answered, his voice carried something it had not carried in the earlier parts of the conversation. Not heavy, not tired, but somewhere in that vicinity. The voice of someone who had thought about this particular question many times before being asked it. Because the goal is not destruction, he said. The goal is to stop the harm. Those are different things. You were not here because your soldiers are evil. You were here because your government has been moving borders and no one had stopped it. We stopped it. You do not need to be destroyed for that to be true. Dreveth was quiet for a long time after that. Then he signed the agreement. He signed it with a Vethkai marker on a physical document that Soren's people had printed specifically for the occasion. And when he was done, he sat back and looked at the document, and looked at Soren and said nothing more. He looked like someone who had just watched the map they had navigated by their entire career be replaced by a different map and who had not yet settled into what it meant to live by the new one. Tarvin understood the feeling. The Vethkai fleet was released over the following 7 hours. Soren's engineering teams, or whatever they were properly called, had spent the negotiation period preparing replacement drive components for the Vethkai vessels. It was either a practical gesture or a deliberate one. Tarvin suspected it was both. The Vethkai ships departed the Kelvath system one by one, drives restored, crews intact. Vessels completely undamaged except for the specific components that had been removed and then repaired and returned. The Vethkai fleet commander departed last aboard the Iron Fist Absolute and sent a single final transmission to the Dominion of Reach before the jump. It said, "Understood." Tarvin thought that was probably the most honest thing the Vethkai had communicated in the entire encounter. After the last Vethkai ship had gone, she returned to the Dominion of Reach one final time. Not for a crisis meeting, not for a negotiation. Soren had asked her to come in a message that was brief and without ceremony. She had come because she was genuinely and deeply curious, and because she had the distinct feeling that this conversation was the one that mattered most of all. They sat in the same briefing room as before, this time with no delegations, no officers flanking them at the table, just the two of them. Soren poured something warm into 2 small containers from a dispenser on the wall and set one in front of her. She looked at it. "Tea," he said. "Specifically a type called oolong. It is a human drink. It may not suit you, but it is what I have, and I believe in offering what one has." She tried it. It was unusual. She tried it a second time. "The council," she said, "is going to need a formal meeting with you." "Yes," he said. "High Counselor Varath will want a comprehensive briefing. Every council member will have questions, many questions. The presence of an unknown civilization of your capabilities is going to generate." She searched for the word, significant discussion. "I imagine so," Soren said. "I need to be direct with you, Commander. There will be fear. Not every species will respond the way I have responded. There are civilizations in the Council that will look at your fleet and see a threat regardless of what you intend." "I know," he said. He held his tea container in both hands, in the way she had noticed humans did, as if the warmth of it was something they were consciously seeking. "We expected that. It is part of why we waited as long as we did. We wanted to have something to offer, not only capability. We wanted to have a record of actions that demonstrates intent. Today was the demonstration," she said. "Today was the beginning of the demonstration," he said. She looked at him. "How many ships, Commander?" "You deferred the answer before." He looked at his tea. Then he looked up at her. "Admiral, I'm going to answer you honestly because you have been honest with me and because the Council needs accurate information to make good decisions." He set the container down. The Titan-class vessels, ships in the size range of the Dominion of Reach and larger. The Council has now seen 15. There are more. She waited. There are 49 Titan-class vessels currently commissioned. He said there are also support fleets, carrier groups, rapid response squadrons, logistical vessels. The total count of commissioned human warships across all size classifications is in the thousands. She sat with that. Thousands. With 49 ships in the size range, she had watched absorb 22 warships, combined fire without registering damage. Built over 300 years of quiet work, while the galactic community ran its committees and its debates and thought it was seeing the full picture of what the galaxy contained. "You were never in danger," she said quietly. "Not from any species in the community. Not at any point in the last 300 years. There are always threats," Soren said. "Not all of them are other civilizations." He paused. "Some of what we encountered beyond the charted regions in the early years of exploration was more dangerous than anything in the galactic community. That is part of why we built what we built, not because we were afraid of you." She thought about what lay beyond the charted regions, about 300 years of human ships moving through the dark outside the known galaxy, encountering things that had eventually required 49 Titan-class vessels as the answer. She found she did not want to ask about that today. There was more than enough to hold already. "I will present your request for council membership," she said. "I will give a full briefing to High Councillor Vareth. I will recommend that the council formally receive your delegation and process the application." She looked at him. "I cannot guarantee the outcome. The council is complicated. All governing bodies are complicated," Soren said. He almost smiled. "We have been watching yours for a long time, Admiral. We are entirely prepared for complicated." She stood up. He stood up. She looked at him across the table, this calm and patient man with steady dark eyes and a voice that had spoken to 22 armed warships and a panicking enemy fleet commander and a Galactic Council admiral with the same unhurried certainty as if the outcome had never been genuinely in question. She extended her hand. He took it. "Welcome," she said, "to the Galactic Community Commander officially from someone who was present." Something shifted in his expression. Something small and genuine that moved beneath the practiced control she had been watching since the moment they first met. Just for a moment, he did not look like a commander. He looked like a person who had waited a very long time for something, and had at last arrived at it. "Thank you, Admiral," he said. She left the Dominion of Reach for the last time and crossed the gap back to the Sovereign Resolve in the shuttle. She sat in the forward seat and looked out at the stars. She thought about the report she had to write. She thought about what words you chose when the most significant first contact event in the history of the galactic community had just taken place, in a system that most council members could not have located on a map. She thought about Councillor Vareth reading it. She thought about every star visible through the viewport and the knowledge that was now permanent inside her. That out there in the dark beyond the charts, those stars had never been empty. There had been ships out there, thousands of ships for 300 years, and none of them had known. The shuttle docked. She walked onto the Sovereign Resolve. Her bridge crew was there, all of them, including the ones who were technically off rotation and should have been resting. They were gathered near their stations or sitting at consoles they had no operational reason to occupy, and they were watching the display screens showing the Kelveth system, showing the Dominion of Reach, showing the distant shapes of the other 14 human vessels at the system boundary. They looked at her when she entered. She looked back at them. "Get me a line to Council High Command," she said. "Priority 1. I need to speak with the Councillor." She took her command chair. Someone sent a message to Commander Soren. "Tell him we will be in contact regarding the formal council introduction proceedings." Her communications officer opened the priority channel. Her crew moved at their stations. Outside the viewport of the Sovereign Resolve, the Dominion of Reach sat still in the Kelveth system, running lights tracing their slow, steady paths across 11 kilometers of dark hull in the starlight. Patient, present, waiting for the rest of the galaxy to arrive at the same understanding. when High Counselor Varath's face appeared on the communication screen. Still silver, still composed, still wearing the expression of someone who had mastered the art of appearing calm, regardless of what was happening. Turvin Ocel looked at him and found exactly the right way to begin. "Counselor," she said, "I need you to open a new file in the Council registry. The entry name will be Humanity, and I need you to clear your schedule for the next several days. What I have to tell you is going to require time." The High Counselor's carefully maintained expression shifted, just slightly, just enough. Turvin allowed herself for exactly one brief moment, the smallest possible version of something that might have been a smile. Then she began her report. And in the Kelveth system, 300 years of silence came to a proper end. If this story moved you the way it moved me, then you already know what I'm about to say. Hit that like button right now because stories like this one deserve to be seen. And if you want more HFY content that hits this hard, subscribe to this channel so you never miss what comes next. Every single upload is another piece of a galaxy worth discovering. Join the crew. We are just getting started.